Hi, I'm continuing my restoration projects on rods. I've had various rods there, some very good ones, for quite a long time now, and I've done stuff to the reel seats, or I want to do stuff to the reel seats to make them how I want. Recently, you'll see my video, and I did this to a Dave Harrell ST rod. Took it from ordinary pushed together loose sliding rings to a screw down seat and put this cork arbor on it, put the rings back on, put the eyes back on there, and it is now exactly how I want it. And I've used it a couple of times, and I'm just sanding down the cork a little bit more as I fish with it, so it's absolutely perfect. Now this time the rod I've got is a rod I've had a lot longer than that one, and this, believe it or not, it looks shocking. Anyone who's a purist on Normark Titan 2000s, shut your eyes now. When I bought this rod way back in 1991, it had a standard screw down fitting, the Normark fitting of the time, with the Duplon, and it's got Duplon at the other end. I got rid of the heavy plastic butt end on it and put cork instead, which is lighter. And what I did was I sawed through the front piece of the screw down, so that the bit that comes off there, sawed through that, and I removed it. And then what I did, I wrapped around that some cork from a fiberglass rod handle, and I just wrapped it around. So underneath here is the screw thread that you find on one of these fittings. It's still there, and I wrapped it around, and then I filed a little flat on it there, and these rings hold the reel actually quite securely, but it's not as good as it could be. So the first job is to try and take off this piece of wrap round fiberglass without damaging the blank, and find out what threads underneath, because there's a possibility that one of these screw downs will be that's Fuji, what's underneath is Fuji, this is Fuji. If it's a 16mm one, which is possible because this is a slim blank, I can just not have to fit that bit again and just fit this piece, which means taking off the two eyes and re-whipping. I've got some resin to seal the whippings when I've done that. Mainly it's black and it's just tipped with a little bit of gold there. I'll try and do something with that. So first job is to try and take that off and see how I get on. It's going to need a fair bit of care, and I'll see what I find. If that comes off and the thread is suitable, I do have an alternative. This is off a MIDI rod that I've been playing with. It was a smashed up rod, and that has probably got a different size thread to the other one. That's a 16mm one. This may well be a 17 or an 18, although it's not. I know it says it's a 16, so it may well fit as well. Whether I can get this bit in a usable state, I don't know. Possibly I can with some cork. So I've got a couple of options there, and that's stage one. Looking at it and thinking, whoa. On to the next bit. So to get back to a point where I can put a new screw down fitting on, I need to cut all that off, and because there's a seam on it, I attack that with my Proxon with a fine cutting wheel, and it takes about 10 minutes to get through that first layer through the araldite. And then once I've got a slot, I put in a big screwdriver and twist it, and eventually it lets go of the araldite and pops off. Then I've got the old screw down fitting, but I can't just take the araldite off, which is quite difficult. This araldite really has stuck on there properly. What I need to do is cut through the old screw fitting and pop that off as well. And I cut through both sides, so it ends up in 2 halves. And again, it takes a few minutes, takes about 10 minutes of patient cutting through, always being very careful I don't just slice right through into the rod blank. And underneath isn't actually a rod blank, there's a special handle blank. So the rod blank itself fits into a handle blank that's slightly bigger diameter. And then on top of that, there was masking tape to bulk it up to the right diameter for the screw down fitting. And because that masking tape is underneath, I'm looking out for that cream colour. And once I get through to that cream colour, I know to stop. And eventually, again, with the screwdrivers, I pop that off. The next stage is to take off the existing 2 bottom eyes off the butt. And I do that by cutting through with a Stanley knife on the top of the whipping, on top of the reel foot. That's easily the best way, and they soon pop off. And then I need to remove the resin finish from the whippings and to clean that up, which is not a very easy job. Got to be very careful, don't damage the blank. And then I can take off the reel fittings that I've used, and it's a case of starting to fit the new reel fitting on it, and I need to bulk that out with some more masking tape to get the right diameter to fit on there, get it a nice tight fit. Once that's done, it's a question of the actual screw down bit comes with a 10mm diameter, as I mentioned before in my video about the Dave Harrell rod. And it's a case of going through with one drill after another by hand, holding it in a gardening glove, because then the sharp edges are more comfortable to hold. And I start with a 10mm one, which fits fairly easily, then an 11, 12, 13, and in this case go right up to a 14. It's still fairly tight, but it will be okay. And then fit that screw fitting on, get it nice and tight and aligned up with where I want it. The next stage is to re-whip the eyes back on. This doesn't take too long. Originally the whippings had a little bit of like a yellow thread on the edges with the black, and I've sort of mocked that up. It's not as good as the original, and I've put on a resin coat on there, or 2 coats. And again, I'm not a professional at rod building. I haven't got much experience, so I've done a fair job on it. I won't say it's brilliant, it's not as smooth as I'd like. I've turned over the rods very regularly as it's set over several hours, kept it nice and level, but there seem to be 1 or 2 little nodule bits. I don't quite get why that is, but this rod is a pretty battered old rod. It's 30 odd years old. It's for me to fish with, not others to look at and worry about, so it's going to be how it is. The final bit on it is to add this cork on the top, glued on 3 corks. Not sure about this front one, whether it's a bit too high, that it needs filing down a bit more, and it's very much a case of fishing with it until I'm and then filing it until I'm happy, but it should be very comfortable. Got the eyes back on there, as you can see. So I've done a reasonable job. I'm not 100% happy with them. Short of playing around forever and probably getting nowhere, it's going to have to do. The thing lines up, that's the important thing. It's all lined up nicely. So there you have it, a now restored handle to how it should have been in long ago. I can get my reels on there. That gets a bit tight under there. I might have to cut it down a little bit more underneath. This handle has got, where I've had a flat on it before, it's chewed up the handle a bit. It's quite dirty and it's chewed up the duplon. For the moment, I'm not going to worry. I think I'm going to fish with it, see how I feel without the flat on there, and see what I can make of it. The alternative is to take off this Duplon and this end cork that I glued on years ago and buy a 5-inch sleeve of cork and glue that on. Some of the cork is still slightly damaged. It's not too bad. And then put another cork. You used to have one of these great big heavy plastic rubber buttons on the end that weigh over an ounce. Sort of counterbalance. I prefer it without it, to be honest with you. So that's the Titan done. Very similar process for the tri-cast, which I'll go through in a separate video. Not much different, just even more brutal to get the handle off and a bit more work needed, but otherwise the steps are much the same. And hopefully this rod will finally be how I really want it. You never know. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.